Hey, welcome back to another episode of Heroic Industries. This is the greatest podcast in the history of podcasts. And this has got to be the best show. I know I say that all the time, but this one's the best. I promise. I say it all the time. Most of the time they're terrible. But this one's the best. I got a chance to catch up with, that's what you say when you are like, have no business being in these conversations with people, and you somehow connect with them, and then you say, I got a chance to catch up with, and that makes you sound like you are an authority, when the truth is I just randomly messaged Jill Miller of Fitness Tune Up and Yoga Tune Up, and asked her if she wanted to be on a podcast, and she said yes, because she's awesome. But Jill's a CrossFit OG, sort of. She is a yoga OG, I will say, from Southern California. She is a fascia expert, which is super interesting. Because fascia is a layer of tissue that kind of lives between your skin and your muscle and between your muscles, and it encases everything. And it's very, very critical to mobility and strength and pain. Pain is huge with fascia, or fascia is very, very important in the process of pain and how you perceive pain. And then, because the fascia is all innervated too, like nerves run in between muscles, through muscles, in between fascia. And so it's everywhere. And the fact that she's an expert at it is so cool with how she's developed her practice. She founded Tune Up Fitness and Yoga Tune Up and the role model method, which is all these cool little balls and devices that you use for soft tissue work and ungluing tissue, and how to connect that with breathing in your nervous system and all kinds of stuff, man. She's got a couple books that we talked about. Body by Breath is the one that I'm going to get into immediately. I can't believe I haven't done this sooner, but anyway, like such critical information for the health of your musculoskeletal system, your nervous system, and how everything kind of like stress response, breath, and your muscles and muscle tension and mobility, how it all works together. And then we also talked about like the fact that she has had a hip replacement. I've had both my hips replaced, and talked about, what led up to that and some recovery and all kinds of stuff. But she is such an interesting person. Her practice of yoga is different in the fact that it's really focused on, like I said, the fascia, and it's not like a traditional yoga discussion. So don't be turned off by that at all. This definitely has huge application to not only law enforcement, but anybody with high stress, anybody that wants to have more connection with your breath and your body and your nervous system, which is everyone, because these issues affect everyone on a chronic and acute scale. So check it out, and let me know what you think.
How are you?
Okay, how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad we finally were able to make this happen.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it like more than I can even put into words. You're like a like CrossFit slash not CrossFit, like OG. I remember watching you back with Kelly Starrett when he brought you on, and it was like a lot of that stuff was like mind blowing at the time. And I've continued to use it for like the last 10, 12 years. It's
Amazing.
hard to believe it's been that long, but yeah.
And it still works. Can't
Well,
wait to talk to you about it and find out how you use it.
yeah. Well, so let's kind of start there. I don't want to take too much of your time up. But so so when I ran my CrossFit gym, I had one of your it was Yoga Tune Up then, but Fitness Tune Up
Mhm.
now. One of your certified coaches I had do yoga at my affiliate, and it was awesome, but it was
Who was
so
that?
different. Um,
Sandy?
no, it was Tiffany. Yep, she
Super
loved you.
smart.
She oh yes, very smart, but she was absolutely like in love with you and the program and ran it really well for us. But it was very different than like traditional yoga, because I had a couple other
hmm
yoga teachers that taught there, and or like came to my gym. They didn't teach there, and they were like they didn't get it. It was very
hmm
different. Um, so can you kind of explain the difference between like traditional yoga and like fitness tune up and kind of what you do?
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of name brands that I am a part of, and so it can be really confusing. But my company is Tune Up Fitness, and then within Tune Up Fitness, I've created a lot of different movement programs. One of which is Yoga Tune Up, one of which is the role model method, and the other is Body by Breath. And then there are other programs that we've kind of rebranded for different gym chains and so on under different names. But what you did with Tiffany and what she brought into the CrossFit was really the first program I ever created, which is Yoga Tune Up. And my goal with Yoga Tune Up was to use yoga as a tool to help people disassemble their own movement and pain patterns. So what I like to say is that Yoga Tune Up helps you live better in your body. It uses a combination of yoga, corrective exercise, self-massage, breath work, and mindset work to help you find and heal your body's blind spots. And your body's blind spots are areas of overuse, underuse, misuse, abuse, or confuse, body confusion. And for me, those confusing parts are the most intriguing because I feel like those parts that we don't propriocept well, that we don't sense well, are really lying in the wake of us from good coordination and are perhaps what is a seed of an accident or injury to come down the road. So all of the work that I do with all my programs really is hunting after this body sense so that we have better command and control of our body and being.
That's awesome. Yeah, then within the realm of like, I don't want to talk exclusively about CrossFit, but CrossFit intensity, tactical athletes intensity. You talk about misuse and abuse, and it's like you don't even understand what you're doing to yourself at the time because you're able to do it. And then like, two hip replacements later, it's like, oh wait, maybe I should have paid attention to this stuff.
Yeah, but I just want to also like decompress the pain of that because, there also are something called birth defects, Anthony. And when you have young hip replacements, if it wasn't, severe accidents or, injuries, which I don't know where maybe yours were injuries, but there's also the other category that it's your mom and your dad's fault.
Yeah,
That's the one
absolutely.
I like.
100%. So, and I wanted to get into this anyway. I'll just kind of uh, hint at this now because I want to go back to some stuff you just said. But yeah, my hip replacements were mostly due to the fact that my hips are flat and dysplastic. So
There
that
you
means
go.
yeah. So like they were shaped flat, there's less cartilage. So therefore, if I have half the cartilage of a normal human being, I'm going to run out of it twice as quick. So I
100%.
made it about to 35. Most people make it to 60, 70, 80 years old. I just ran out of it, twice as fast. Plus, I was super aggressive on them and kind of put the pedal to the metal on it. So I don't know what are you going to do? But with that said, some of that definitely was like looking back, like abuse and misuse, right? Like too much intensity, too little recovery, like not paying attention to this stuff. And it was like very clear, like looking back to my time playing college football, even if I would
Hmm.
have understood some of these things about
Sure.
movement and mechanics and like the fact that I had no internal hip rotation for
Oh,
my
yeah.
my entire life, right? I had impingement my entire life. So I didn't even realize that you were supposed to be able to internally rotate your hip. Like your foot's supposed to go that way, and it never did. So if I could have understood that and seen that, I probably could have pushed another few years out. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could have buffered them somewhat for sure, but also there are so many other benefits to doing recovery work for your nervous system, for your resilience, for cognitive benefits, and so on. So I hear you, and on the other end of the spectrum, as it's so funny because you and I corresponded for such a long time about the hip stuff.
Yeah.
'Cause, I also had a hip replacement at 45, but mine was two factors. One, the birth defect. Thanks, mom. And then the other was I stretched my body like Gumby into illegal contortion shapes that probably no human, should be doing on a regular basis. For the same reasons, they were tremendously satisfying. It really gave me a lot of my self worth And I just love the intensity on the other side of the movement spectrum of this sort of stretch intensity spectrum.
That's so interesting because I've had no desire to ever do
And I would never play football. That's why we're a good match.
Let me ask you this. I'm just totally curious because I had a lot of people when I was going through my hip replacement because I had one done in like 2017 and the other one done in 2019, and they fell
Yeah.
apart kind of progressively about on the same rough time frame. But I had a lot of people at my gym at the time saying, "Well, do you wish you would have like back things down or not done things?" And I was like, man, I've done a lot of cool stuff with playing college football, competing in CrossFit, being a SWAT cop, a lot of law enforcement stuff, wearing a duty belt. That wasn't good for my hips either. And honestly, I wouldn't trade a minute of it because like it has entirely made me who I am and like is what it is. I'm just grateful that there's medical procedures where I'm not in a wheelchair for life now.
Full on. And that acceptance, that self-acceptance of your process is so healthy and it's so helpful. Like getting a joint replacement is not a death sentence. And it is a chapter two for so many people. I mean, almost everybody that I work with, they're so happy that they got their joint replaced, unless there was something really off within the surgery, and that does happen in rare cases. And it's just so devastating and complicated. But for the most part, especially if you're doing corrective work and working to get even more robust than you possibly thought you could ever be, it's just there's no reason to not do it and to beat yourself up for the former you that ended up having that circumstance where you needed to have a joint replaced.
Yeah. So what did you do? Did you do anything leading up to having your hip replaced? Did you just have the one done?
Yes. Yeah. So that's an interesting story. So when I went in to get, I waited. I had some on and off hip pain in my tensor fascia lata. So the tensor fascia lata is a short hip flexor that feeds right into the iliotibial tract. So it's a hip flexor just like your psoas and your iliacus and your quadricep muscles and sartorius. But this little muscle was my canary in the coal mine. I would wake up in insane amounts of pain not every night, but many nights a week. And I would do corrective work that would put out the fire, but I knew that I was having more frequency of this pain. I was also having children. I started having kids really late in life. I had my first kid at 42 and I had my second kid at 44. And I just didn't want any medical scans or any imaging that would make me doubt my body. So even though I was having this hip pain, I thought I had a torn labrum. That was my hunch. And I was like, you know what? I know enough corrective work. What I teach for a living, I'll be able to deal. And then I think when my son was about 10 months old, I finally started to feel pain in my knee. And then I was like, no, I cannot stand to lose two joints. So that's when I went and I had imaging done, and it was just, there was no labrum. That's the funny part. Like, what labrum? It was decimated, just completely catastrophic. I can show you my joint. I can show you my femur. I have it on my desk. I'd have to leave the room and go get it, but it was just destroyed. And so when I went into my ortho for his reading, his first 5 words out of his mouth were, "So, when do you want to schedule?" Like, he tested my hip. He was like, "Hi, I'm so and so." He tested my hip and then he said, "So, when do you want to schedule?" That was it. There was no conservative measures. I had blown past every door of conservative treatment. Thank goodness I was so well preserved because of what I do for a living and probably my attitude about pain. It doesn't scare me. That that was it. So, and he had x-rayed the other hip also, and he said, "Give that one 5 years." And that was one thought worm that I wasn't going to digest. And here I am almost 8 years later, and my right hip is totally fine. But,
Oh,
it's not unusual that one will follow the other in a lot of circumstances. I'm hoping that I'm not going to, I'm going to dodge that bullet by doing the work that I'm doing now.
yeah. Yeah. My story was somewhat similar. in the fact that the first doctor I went to was for right hip pain, and he looked at it and he goes, your hips are completely flat and dysplastic. There's nothing I can do. You're gonna have to go get them replaced." And I was like, "Both of them?" He said, "Yeah, actually, your left one is 20 times worse than your right." So that one,
Hmm.
he called it. I hated this doctor. I couldn't stand his bedside manner, and the way he talked to me was completely just like it was so direct, and I just wasn't ready to hear it. But he was just like, "Yeah," he goes, "that one's going to go first. Your right one can probably push back if we can get some pain management." And he was dead on right. My left one I had to get replaced about a year later, and there was, yeah, I tried to do some shots and stuff. I tried to box squat my way out of it, like high
Mm.
box squat, build your glutes, and that buffered it out on the right side, but that left side just ended up going fast. And then yeah, and I actually went on a multi-state, like all over the Midwest, talking to different doctors and
Yeah.
just making sure because I knew I had to do it, but I think you probably have more resources where you're at for like doctors. Here it's like you're in a smaller market. So I just wanted to make sure I talked to the guy that does all the West Side Barbell hip replacements. Like I went to
Yes.
Columbus and talked to him. I went to U of M and talked to those guys, and
Great.
they all basically told me the same thing. And I was like, okay, now I know how to do this, and I learned a lot about when you are looking at surgery, regardless of what it is, like you are contracting the surgeon, like they're working for you, and you
Hmm.
get to pick like this. So you can't just take the first guy's, like recommendation and say, okay, I guess this is just what I do. And this is what the doctor said. Like you're hiring them to do work on yourself. It's like human carpentry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think people really do need to find the group or the clinic that feels like the best fit. And I had done my work ahead of time. I did a lot of work ahead of time. And I loved my surgeon. I know I sound so cavalier when I quote him. He was very friendly when he said it that way, and his bedside manner was and still is absolutely incredible. I've seen him for follow-ups for other issues, and his name is Dr. Jason Snibbe, and I just think he's such an incredible human. And I'm so lucky. I really am very lucky to have found him. But I also considered other surgeries and other options. But I know my own anatomy, and I also knew where my locus of pain was, and my locus of pain was anterior, and so I didn't want to have the anterior approach because the thought of having more scar tissue in that area was daunting to me. And so he has an approach that he actually created himself. It's an innovation on a procedure that's commonly done in Australia called the PATH procedure, PATH. So people can look up the PATH procedure, but what he calls it is direct superior. So with his robots and whatever other hardware he has at his hospital in Los Angeles, he has something called the direct superior approach. And I don't know if he's trained other people to do it, but they they go through the fascial planes of the side of the hip, and then they end up getting all the way down to the joint capsule. They cut the piriformis tendon reflected back, and then are able to access right into the hip joint. They saw off the femur, they hammer the thing in, da, 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 da. And the hardware I got is called a dual mobility
Hmm.
head. So that allows athletes and young people like myself to regain complete mobility. In fact, I have better mobility in my left hip than I have in my right, and not lose a second off of the ability to do everything that I do in my life. It didn't impair any range of motion. And it's quite an extraordinary surgery. I mean, every surgery has its ramifications and has its downstream consequences. But yeah, I was really happy. I'm really happy, and I've recommended the surgery to a lot of colleagues, and they've all been happy. And I think some of them are doing better than me, actually, with their
Uh,
strength gains post surgery.
Yeah, so that's kind of the same experience that I had. I did the anterior approach for both of them,
Mhm.
but I looked at that I've heard it described as a direct posterior approach. So it's superior and it's like it's more in like the medial glute, right? It's kind of like where it goes, and it's like a micro incision. So the incision's smaller, I think, than
Yeah,
the
it's a 4 centimeter incision.
yeah. Uh,
Mind-boggling.
that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
My incision was probably I don't know 3 inches, 4 inches long.
But
Um,
also, like, I mean, I didn't care. Like, I wasn't like, I don't want to be scarred. Like, I don't care if I get a scar. I'm like, get this
I
hip
need this
out of my
fixed.
body.
Yes,
Get
yes.
it out. I didn't care if it was an 8 inch scar. Like, because I'm not very aesthetics focused. I can't see anyway. I'm so internal. I'm a feel type of person. So, but that's my pain. Other people, scars are really psychologically challenging, right? And it reminds you, for a lot of people, really it can remind you of the pain. It can remind you of that journey. Me, I just think they're kind of cool,
Yeah. Well, they tell a story, that's for sure.
for
But
sure.
yeah, I was the same way with like just get this thing both times, just get this thing out of me. Because I remember like one, I couldn't sleep, like you said. I couldn't sleep. I had the classic like posterior like medial glute and then the same anterior pain that you had, just both of
Mm.
and no matter what position I get in, I couldn't get comfortable and it was like constant. And then sitting in a squad car with the duty belt on was just
Oh,
was
the
just
worst.
it was physical torture. And it was like I'd get up to go walk around and then that would hurt and then I'd have to sit down because that hurt too bad and then that would hurt and I was like this is hell. Like this is
Yeah,
literal.
and then if you're called to action, like if you're called into, I mean, I can't
Yeah.
imagine, like I think about that now, like having to spring into action and override that pain if your body will let you, right? Because my pain wasn't as bad as yours. I didn't have that lateral medius pain. I didn't have to take any painkillers leading up to the surgery. I remember, so obviously you're familiar with Kelly Starrett and his wife Juliet. So Kelly wrote the foreword to my book, The Role Model, and Juliet had her hip replaced. I think she had both of her hips replaced before I went in for my surgery. And so I got a lot of really great pointers from her. And I remember one of her tips was take all the medication leading up to the surgery. You don't have to be in pain. And it was like I didn't have to take meds leading up to the surgery. I was really lucky, but I understand because arthritis, that end stage osteoarthritis rears itself, it manifests itself differently in every body. And if you can get away with if you can get away with a little bit of dampening that pain response so that you can get on with your daily diligence, just do it. Like, don't suffer.
Well, and what I did a lot of times to help dampen that response was a lot of glute work, just trying to
Yeah.
get my glutes as strong as possible. And then honestly, I did a ton of gut smashing. I remember doing on the softball, what's the
The
Courgeous ball?
gorgeous ball.
Yes, the Courgeous ball. I know you got one close.
I do. It's actually deflated because I use it as a model of the diaphragm. But
Yeah.
yes, the gorgeous
Yep.
ball.
Yep. So I would keep it about half deflated and I would just roll on that and that would help enough so I could get to sleep. Um,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I should like rewind and restate. The reason I think that I didn't need to take medication is because I used my rubber drugs, but I had been using rolling. I'd been doing self-myofascial release for so long. It is part of my daily practice. And I do think that it is like you're attesting to, it's a huge part of keeping the pain at bay and allowing your tissues to restore length tension, even if it's just temporary, because yes, you're going to go to sleep and it's going to suck, right? Because your brain is like, oh, wait a minute, I think this is supposed to feel like this, zap, zap. But there are those corrective works that you can do, the glute strength prevention program. I think that's really helpful. And then the concentrated selected rolling, especially that the gluteus medius, that is taking all of your body's weight and just thinking it has to control the hip for you.
Yeah. what was I gonna say? So coming back from your hip replacement,
Hmm.
if you had to, what have you had to modify? I'm always like, I've been half tempted to try to email somebody from Ready State just to see if like distracting the hip the same way that I did before, it was okay, or if that's going to be bad for the joint. You know what I mean? Like
So
I don't.
I think that's definitely that's a conversation with your surgeon to
Yeah.
find out what is that type of traction load. I don't think traction on the joint, my joint, would be a good idea. I think it would take a hell of a lot of force to dislocate it, but I
Yeah.
personally, I think you can get traction in those tissues in different ways without going all as to the depth of the bone. And you
Yeah.
can do capsular work with the therapy balls. Like you can get to different levels of tissue depth with very, very specific arrangements of the therapy balls and pressure. And then, like sort of using blocks to help um, get you in there to up to get to depth.
Okay.
And
Um,
then there's other, I don't know what you're going after, but there's other tools and devices on the market, I think, that can help address calcifications and stiffness that can accumulate for lack of movement or scar tissue that is impeding movement. And that is specifically a tool called the extracorporeal shockwave therapy. Shockwave therapy is incredible for it sends acoustic waves through the tissue, and it regenerates calcified tissue, so sticky, adhesed, agglomerated fascia. It stimulates a cell called the fasciocyte that's within the fascial tissues, and it starts to spurt out after about 24 hours. It starts to spurt out hyaluronan, and the hyaluronan works its way into the tissues, and tissues start to liquefy again. So it's an absolutely amazing tech, and I've had work done with that device on many different tissues of my body,
do you know
including the hip.
So does it have to be like the medical, like high dollar device? Because I've had that too. And then, but I've seen like there's like you can get versions of it for like $300 and like it's a home version. Like are those, do you know
I
anything?
don't know.
Yeah,
I
I've
don't
seen
know.
those.
I'd have to, you'd have to like, you have to go back and look and see, are they using the same patent? I have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, I can't imagine they'd be as powerful, like powerful enough to do that. That's actually the
No, I
same.
mean,
That's
my chiropractor has one
Mhm.
that is $25,000. I mean,
Yep.
like these are serious medical devices.
Yeah, that's actually the same technology that they use to vaporize kidney stones. Yep.
100, yep.
Yep.
So you
Which
are familiar with this amazing
yeah, well,
thing.
I've had one of those vaporized, and it's not like that's also not fun.
Oh
So, so like we're talking about like, prep and recovery from like a major medical procedure, major, birth defect, major injury. Let's put it in context of just everyday wear and tear for like desk jockey athletes, or specifically in this context, like sitting in a squad car with the duty belt on, where we are sitting for, 4 to 6 hours a day, with intermittent spurts of maybe intensity, wearing a duty rig that just shoves everything into flexion and anterior. And like Brian McKenzie, I talked to him years ago, and he goes, "I guarantee your hips are terrible." And I was like, "Well, you just met me." And he was like, "Well, you're a cop, and every cop I've worked with, 100% of the time has had bad hips." And I was like, "Okay." So with that said, like, what I would make the statement, like every cop who wears duty gear is subject to basically the same protocols on like a maybe a minor level or something like that. But what would you say like is like go to uh, restorative hip practices like that you would use on the daily?
On the daily. So I definitely would do abdominal massage, what Kelly calls gut smashing, and I would start in a side lying position. So, I mean, first and foremost, let me see if I can find my gorgeous ball. And we have a million of them around here. Oh, here we go. So hip specific protocol. I mean, what I want to do first with anybody that's has a lot of accumulated stress, any police officer, firefighter, anybody who's having to do watch in challenging locations or physical arrangements, crouching positions, long seated positions. You want to deal with the stress that's accumulated just from having to be so vigilant and attentive. And so what I would do with those folks, with those bodies, is side lying on the ribs first. I'm finding in general that side lying on the ribs is one of the fastest ways to attenuate a pain response or to acclimate people to the oddity of having the pressure go into the body. So I'll adjust the Coregeous ball to their pressure likeness and have them side lying on the rib cage. And then that's really great because you can start to help them conduct breathing there. So they become familiar with rib cage movements that are obviously a part of whole body breathing. And the pressure of the ball on the side of the ribs starts to traction the thoracic spine and the thoracolumbar junction. So the thoracolumbar junction is really where the rib cage sits on the low back spine. That gets super short and super tight. And by the way, that's where the psoas originates. So we're going to start to talk to the psoas from its north side, basically. But we're going to get a whole other host of benefits by doing the side lying rib cage breathing. So after their comfort develops there, then I will typically have them do some rotations. So the rotations in the just basic general parlance is open and close the book. So you would reach the top arm forward and then reach the top arm back. And that's going to get the rib cage to start to do a type of scroll action, right? So you have two rib cages. You have a gigantic rib cage, but you have two halves to the rib cage, each with its own 12 ribs that may be oriented differently from side to side. Right? We're not very symmetrical from side to side. As you know, your hips are not symmetrical. But by the way, the pairs of ribs you have also not symmetrical. So this is a way to start improving some of the glide in the spinal vertebra, in the movements of the ribs, which are housing your lungs and your heart. And then you go to the other side and do some basic actions like that. Breathing into the ball, and then just some really lovely rotations. And then the more your students are comfortable with that, they can also be a little bit more dramatic in the range of reach as they go. And I always do check-in and rechecks. I always do little tests all along the way. We didn't start on your back, but you'd have people roll onto their back at this point and get a sense of their posture at rest. And they're going to have a very, very pronounced proprioceptive and interoceptive change to the way their sacrum, lumbar, and thoracic spine, and even their head and neck, they're going to feel a radical change in their posture. They're going to feel longer. And especially if you're wearing a belt, all of this is so compressive and just really pulls you, deeper into your body. So having a sense of freedom in the rib cage, and the spine is a miracle. And then I would go down into the side waist. So the side waist now has also acclimated to the weirdness of having a ball press into you. And there's going to be, I can guarantee you, less reactivity than if you just laid people down, navel down on the ball and said, go to town here. Nobody wants to be punched in the gut. And when a Coregeous ball or any tool goes into the abdomen, the body's natural stress response is going to be to push away, and it's going to be to tense up. And that tension is going to feel like discomfort, like pain. The brain is going to say, I need my next breath, get out of here. So when you're doing the side lying, you are out of the way of the diaphragm's central tendon. And so it's just an easier way to access the gut. So in the side lying on the waist, you would inhale, hold your breath, contract, and then on exhale, relax. So we would do a contract, relax mobilization there. And that contract, relax, piped in with your breath, is a really great way to adjust the stretch reception all over this lower core area. And that's going to include the psoas. And once you start to feel more compliant, once the ball starts to feel like it's entering you, then you can start to do more movement, more creative movements. And that can include tucking and untucking the pelvis, which is critical, especially as you said, you're forced into this radical anterior tilt.
Mhm.
And so I marry the tuck, untuck of the pelvis with breathing movements. By the way, everything I'm explaining is outlined in my book, Body by Breath, like all of this. And it's all over my Instagram feed too. You don't need to buy the book. Like go to YouTube. I've got it on my website. I've got all this stuff out there for free because it's so important. But if you want to know all the why and wherefore, then you get the book so you can read like, oh my gosh, that's happening to my liver now. Oh my goodness, what's happening in my small intestine with this? So you can create these movements, and then maybe you have a little bit of permission to start to track your way into the anterior gut, right? And so that you can roll belly down and maybe do some experimenting over on one side of the abdomen. Now, we haven't even gone to the other side yet. If going into the front of the abdomen still feels like somebody's kicking you, then forget about it. You go to the other side and you can do the same process there. You breathe in, you hold your breath, contract, you exhale, relax. Do that for many rounds to acclimate. Don't be surprised that this other side feels like it's like a different person, because again, we are very biased in our right and left sides. We just tend to favor one versus the other. And then after the ball starts to feel its way into you, then you can start to work with it. Tuck on tucks. You can do a little rolling. Then you can maneuver it into towards the midsection. Now, there's a lot more to detail in terms of what I would then do with the psoas. There are many, many other activities with the femur and the hip socket with the coxal joint. Lots of different maneuvers that we can do to affect the psoas and the iliacus. And so some further rolling with the smaller balls, like the yoga tune-up balls or the plus balls or even the alpha balls, would be helpful to get into the glutes, get into the adductors in different ways, so that we've got some more rotation available to us, and we also have command. We can control what we're doing with the glutes to help the psoas lengthen. So there's just so much. I have a lot of classes that cover this also I have an online classroom called Move, Breathe, Roll, and I have this one class called the diaphragm psoas axis. And that lesson is, you will be an inch and a half taller after that. It's so good because it's all about the psoas and the diaphragm's fascial intersection. And so working on that parachute and the parachute string relationship.
Okay. Is this something that you want to do like after shift? I know a lot of people will like work out after shift. So I know that you don't want to like make your stabilizer muscles really loose prior to like lifting weights. So would you do this like before
Well, your
lifting, after?
stabilizers are already compromised. So what good are you getting out of your lift if your psoas is hypertonic and you don't have good length tension relationship with it? So a lot of my perspective with that is, you need to do a little recovery rollout from the stress of the shift, and then do your lift, and then triple down on the rolling. So maybe the rolling is 5 minutes. Maybe you just do a little bit of this work. Maybe you don't do, because what I just outlined, this is like what ideally this would be about a 20-minute sequence. But you can do a few rounds of breath in each of these positions. It'll take you 4 to 5 minutes, and you will be able to strengthen your body on axis. So what you're describing, just jump out of the car, jump out of the shift after the 8 to 10 hours, and then start lifting. Your spine is no longer on its ideal axis, right? You have been scrunched into a position for however many hours. My recommendation is restore your length and then strengthen in that length. And that's the remodel. Otherwise, you just keep building tension on top of tension. And that's not going to get you more hip extension tomorrow. It's going to get you sore. And it's going to wear out the lumbar sacral junction. And the highest rate of herniations are at the lumbosacral junction from that, just from the years or decades of compression, and then all of a sudden a rotation or a forward bend, there it goes. So restore your length through the rolling, then do your strength training, minding impeccable alignment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we're before we even get into making the pattern stronger, we have to make sure that the pattern is like, proper. Because if we're not, then you're just making a dysfunctional movement pattern stronger, which is gonna abuse and misuse, and just like we talked about earlier. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah. I said what I said. I'm going to stick to it.
Well,
Cheers.
that makes sense too, because I also coach high school football players, and they do the classic thing that you see in every CrossFit gym where they get the foam rollers out and just roll out their backs, and then and I'm like, well, why don't we spend a little bit of time? Let's kind of like unglue our quads because you've been sitting in a shortened position all day during school. Do a little bit of like more intense focus specific because you can't keep them focused for longer than a minute or two because they're high school children. Most adults are like that too, but like especially high school kids. And then from there, then honestly you get to see like who's like tissue quality is really terrible, who's ready to go, who needs a little bit more help, that kind of stuff. And really like we're the same way. And I think that what you're saying, you can use it to prime the system and then use it to recover after. And it's like the same thing. You're just using it for like, different specific intensities and purposes.
Yeah, well, also the research shows that rolling prior to exercise increases torque. So why wouldn't you want to get more force production out of your body in a workout? So a few minutes of rolling, and then selecting which tissues you want to make a difference in. I had a trainer in here the other day. She's a super gifted trainer, and her quads are agglomerated. They're so stiff. Now, she's not a football player and she's not an officer. I can only imagine how thick and non-gliding portions of their quads, your quads, those high schoolers are. So getting a smaller tool, so foam rollers are a pretty blunt tool. I like using smaller tools because they can actually address septa. They can address the envelope meeting points where one muscle structure abuts another muscle structure, where we must be able to have appropriate glide and stretch between the soft tissues. If the tissues don't have that, there's just going to be less optimal force production, also lesser quality joint range of motion benefits. So we want our kneecaps tracking right. We've got to do very detailed work in the quads, not just roll over a hard foam roller and hope for the best, but you really do want to spend a good amount of time with your breath there too, and do different types of contract relax, but also different angles of application. So not just going up down, but also I'm demonstrating the side to side thing. We want to try to, in a sense, stretch apart the grapefruit segments of these quads, fluff them, and you'll get so much deeper in your squat. Your jumps will be better. Your kneecap will track better, and there'll be a trickle down effect to the ankle and foot, and a trickle up effect to the hip and spine. So I'm lots of there's so many body parts to roll, Anthony. Like there's so much to do. So yeah, pick your tiny battle prior and then spend longer post.
Okay. Now, with something that I just thought of while you're saying that, I know you said the hard object is going to elicit like a more of a sympathetic response, right?
Mhm.
Um, what do you think about like, have you seen Donnie Thompson and the body
Mm.
tethering that he does? So I've done some of that. I went to one of his seminars and it was like crazy, the intensity. But like, how does kind of that fall and factor into this? Because it's kind of the same, but not really, you know?
Oh yeah. So what Donnie Thompson does is he uses these metal pipes of varying weights and applies them directly on the body. And it reminds me of some of the massages that I've gotten in the past where you literally have to dissociate from your body in order to tolerate that pressure. And I think that that can be for a training, it can be very beneficial, both for the tissue, but also for your psychology. But I think that it's one application. I hope that people have a variety of applications, because I think it's very hard to replicate that perfectly in every circumstance. So when I mean dissociate from your body, it's not always bad to like get really gnarly deep tissue work, right? So I've definitely have been quoted probably as saying like, and it's true, it doesn't have to hurt to work, but sometimes working with that edge of your ability to tolerate pressure, that psychological edge of being able to tolerate pressure and time under pressure, I think it can really, build some robust psychological gains. And I think there is some tissue gains to be had there in terms of stretch tolerance. But it has to be at your tolerance. So if it's so much that you pass out, it's gone beyond, right? You have to be able to breathe, ideally stay present, and, work, ideally stay, not split and go to, go to outer space so that you can just be there. But at times you will have to split and go to outer space in order to endure, the next 6 seconds of this. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So tell me if I'm kind of understanding what you're saying, or if I'm way off base. Like doing that and having what does he call it, the ex-wife roll on your quads, like that thing is like 100-pound cylinder, and
Mm-hmm.
it is just like you have to. There's a limit that everybody has where it's like that's too much. I can't do it anymore. And Donnie was kind of funny. It was crazy. He would try to find that on people and be like, "Who wants like to basically challenge me to tap out?" Like so, everybody's got kind of a breaking point, but in order to go through that, you have to really challenge staying calm under a severe sympathetic response. Like being crushed to death is what it feels like. And like so it activates your fight or flight system huge. But also like I'm so like my calves and ankles are so tight. Like when I do downward dog, classic yoga stretches, like if I'm in that position, that also challenges me the same way. So I hit that sympathetic response, and then it challenges me to stay present and to focus on the tissue and focus on the position and focus on like calming down. Same thing that we do in the cold. So is there
Yeah,
some
that's
application
what
of
I'm
that?
saying. I think that it is a novel, training stimulus, but I don't think that it's necessary to do that as your main self-myofascial release application. But I do think there's something extremely novel about it for that testing of sympathetic, parasympathetic response. Where I come from, I think that people are so used to enduring pain to get their gains. And I want to show them that it is unnecessary, that I can actually get your shoulder more mobility with less threat altogether than you could ever possibly imagine. So, can we set up parameters, parasympathetic parameters, that endow you with virtuous relaxation response rather than having to test your mettle in a threatening way in order to get a sympathetic, parasympathetic excitation sort of battle guard up.
Yeah.
So I think that it would be really interesting to do a workshop with Donnie Sunday and contrast all of that. Um,
That would be super cool. That would be very, very cool to see that
and
because it's like the same type of idea but applied totally different. It's kind of like like a golf bag. Like Donnie's thing is a driver. You don't need a driver for every swing. You know what I mean? Like usually it's like a driver and then a 9 iron and then you kind of work your way down to the putter, right? So it's like, you know, I don't know. Does
yeah,
that
I
make sense?
mean, for sure. I mean, what I do has a lot of refinement to it. And, there's a lot of detail about anatomy and the different aspects of fascia and the different cellular elements of fascia. But I can also see how his work is effective. So that's a great question. And I have used it probably at Kelly's place, at somebody's place. I used it, and I thought it felt really awesome. Um, but yeah, I don't own one.
Yeah, I'll use that sometimes with like the football players that I train. Just use a kettlebell, and I'll kind of like roll with that if I need something heavier than like a lacrosse ball or something. So kind of the same,
Yeah,
kind of
but
the
we
same.
don't have to put our body through a meat grinder to
Yeah.
get a pasta maker to get the result. And I think what that those extraordinarily heavy tools do is they put stress into the tissue that is fully compressive. And a lot of the work that I do is decompression work. So we use the balls, they're covered with grippy rubber in order to actually traction tissue, local tissue, or planes of tissue away from other tissues that they're already squashed into. So I don't want to create more squash with my tools. I'm trying to offload things
Oh,
and
okay,
fluff
okay, okay.
things up.
Got it.
So all of these different inputs can, do different things for the body when we look at the different variables in self-myofascial release. So exactly what you're saying. He has one application. There are many other applications I think that are necessary for healthy tissue and for a healthy nervous system.
And so this is something I've thought about for a while, and like I wonder if anybody would be interested in doing this study. But the tool of using like a heavy weighted blanket for autism and stuff like that,
Mm,
I think that there is a connection between what Donnie does and that. And
sure.
I think the connection is that's the first thing I thought of when I took that. I was like, this has got to be the calming effect of the weighted blankets has got to be similar to this, the way that the weight felt and the way you feel afterwards. So that yeah, that extreme sympathetic effect.
It's a trial by pressure,
Yeah.
and your nervous system goes into a complacent docile state, which with the use of force, I mean, there is a relationship to forces that you're having to negotiate structurally and mentally. So, but yeah, we should ask Temple Grandin what she thinks about it.
Um, Yeah, so all right, so that covers a lot of that, and I really didn't plan on talking about it, but I thank you. I learned a ton. Um, what, where do you use like classic yoga or just regular stretching in your routines? Like, where would you recommend that's like a good place to put it versus like just rolling and smashing and that kind of stuff?
I think the stretch is a great pre-test and post-test for your rolling. Um, I love to do stretch positions to test out my range of motion, also my proprioception prior to rolling and after rolling. And then I use novel stretch within the rolling itself. So by rolling, the rolling work that I do both in role model and body by breath often include positioning. And so that positioning takes advantage of the ball's anchor and then can tie in continuities from top to bottom of the body and from inside out. Because we're also typically using a breath strategy within a lot of the different rolling positions because the diaphragm is always changing its, where it is as it's going through a breath cycle. So your intercostals. So we want to kind of reap the benefits of movement in the context of the rolling. So sometimes the stretch looks like dynamic stretching. So there's gentle, slow movements like I was describing earlier, or sometimes it can be a static stretch. And sometimes those static stretches also involve isometrics. So there's a lot of strength work that's going into some of these stretch positions in the context of rolling. Isolated stretching, I love, I mean, you're talking to somebody who loves stretching. I love stretching. That I have to be forced to like do, I actually love lifting weights too. It's the jumping exercise that I have to be forced to do. Um, But I like to do for myself, I will do dynamic stretching prior to a workout along with rolling. And then post exercise, I will do long held static stretches married with breathing to address the areas that I feel like got the most training in the loaded exercise. And then, later in the day, I'll do extensive rolling just to try to help build up some parasympathetic power for sleep and for dealing with my kids and husband at the end of the day, my worst time.
That's a really good point. Can you say that again? You build up parasympathetic power.
Well,
Is
that's ideal.
is it, I mean, is that the way you phrased it though?
I
I
did just now. I've never said it that way, but a big theme of body by breath. I cannot believe it took me this long to come up with that phrase, Anthony. Thank you. I knew I would be able to have some creative things come out with you. Um, the whole Body by Breath book is about helping people build their tolerance capacity for a parasympathetic state. All this discussion, even just talking about the ex-wife and Donnie's tools, we are so built to go from 0 to 60. We're such sympathetically organized organisms, and it takes a lot to get us to go from 60 to 0 skillfully. Like most of us don't rest until we're injured or we just shut down with the TV on, but that's not really skilled parasympathetic dominant state. That's will often bypass being able to be reflective, be in slow breathing, being present. We'll bypass that and just go to sleep. So what the Body by Breath approach tries to do is build your aptitude for being able to tolerate these stages of parasympathetic arousal. And so when I say build the parasympathetic power, for me, a lot of the need for parasympathetic power is being able to stay present with my kids' frustrations, with my husband's complaints, and with the last fire burning, coming from my office or from email or from my a sick relative or what have you. Being able to think about the folks that you work with, tactical athletes, the ability for them to stay calm and present in the face of everybody else's chaos and negativity or energy, and be able to stay clear, stay the course, and be able to make the best next decision. And that a lot of that comes from being able to tap into your parasympathetic reservoir for clarity. Otherwise, you're just
Yeah.
right. You're overtaken by fear, anxiety, or threat.
Yeah. So a lot of these dots got connected for me when I did that. Like for about a year or so, I worked with Brian McKenzie and Rob Wilson with their Art of Breath. I love.
Yes.
I talk to Rob all the time. Still, I just did a podcast with him. I have to do a lot of editing on it, but
Oh, I cannot wait to hear.
he's so good, man. He is so good, and as far as
Yeah, I
like
know.
knowing how to connect the dots for like the population that I work with, like holy
Yes.
crap. But it is not. It is not a light switch. Your nervous system is not a light switch. Your sympathetic nervous system is not one or a zero. It's a spectrum, right? You're always
Mm-hmm.
somewhere on it, and where you're talking about building parasympathetic power is where we never train in law enforcement. We never train that. But yet everybody wants to talk about de-escalation, de-escalation, de-escalation. It's like, well, you've never trained these cops to be anywhere but scared to death of their physical safety, scared to death of getting sued, scared to death of getting fired, scared to death of everything, man. It's like, what kind of job can you have where you have to wear a camera everywhere, even to the bathroom, because nobody trusts you? You know what I mean? And now, what's that going to do to your nervous system? Because you're worried about getting in trouble all day, let alone somebody shooting you, right? So your nervous system is always pegged at a 10, and you never learn how to bring it down to like an 8. So when I show up on a scene, like I have to decide based on your behavior where I want my nervous system to be. And if I just know how to turn it on or turn it off, like it's either a 10 or I'm asleep, then how can you expect your cops to make good decisions in that stress state? It's impossible. So like what we need to do is learn how to turn the dial up, turn the dial down. And at some point, if you get into a shooting or something, it's going to jump to 10, right? That's going to happen. You can't stop it, but you need to be able to harness it as soon as you can and decide if you need to keep it at a 10 or take it down to a 7. And that's how you regulate and de-escalate, is like you have to de-escalate yourself before you can de-escalate anybody else. And nobody wants to take the time to do that because it's hard. And then you have to demand more from your trainers, demand more from your cops, and then with that comes a lot of different things. Like you have to pay more, you have to demand that you hire better people, And in a situation where nobody wants to do the job already, that's difficult, but not impossible.
Yeah, I have this phrase in the book called it's about turning on your off switch. But you're right. This is a number of dimmers that we're dialing around. And one of the biggest dials is your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is a dial that you can navigate at all times. Your breath is also going to be telling you, it's whispering to you in its pacing what's going on within your physiology. So teaching individuals some of these obvious physiological cues and then different ways of harnessing and harvesting it for the right use, I think is critical. And I really hope that you, in this journey that you're on, this investigative journey and your own curiosity and your own experience, that you will be able to find ways in to these groups with education. Rob too, Brian too. I have so much admiration for them, and they're quoted in my book. I do have a course coming up, the Body by Breath Immersion. I think you would love it because it's a lot of what we've been talking about. And there's so much more because it's all the practicals. There's just so many practicals in that course, and it's online. So, and
Oh,
I'm,
sweet.
it's like half online and then half lives. And there are people from all walks of life that take it, from the mental health space, the PT space, the MDs, yoga teachers. It's a really interesting professional collective that come together for that work.
Well, and it
And
should be. It totally should be because like those dots are able to be connected across the board. It doesn't matter. Like stress is stress in different ways, and you got to know how to, like you said, harness those tools and utilize that for specific purposes like that. Yeah.
yeah, and military folks, like we've had a number of people from not just the U.S. and Canadian military either. So I can't name other military, but it's there. It's out there in the open. Anybody can enroll.
Well, sweet. Awesome. Um, yeah, I wanted to shoot for about an hour. Do you have anything else that you think would be super pertinent and like we would be amiss to not talk about it?
There's so much to talk about,
Right.
and I'm glad we spent a lot of time talking about the hip. But you know, healing is also a spectrum, and you're never done. So it's just you're going to be learning about your hips and all of you for the rest of your life. I was having that conversation the other day, like, no, that's not done. That's not done. They're not done. I'm not done healing my hips, whatever. I'm where I am today, and I keep learning from them. I think the other maybe smaller points to make, they're big points, but just to make them small, is that breathing is not a nose to lungs experience. Breathing is a body wide experience and needs to be respected as that. And it really is such an ultimate inside out tool. I was alluding to that a moment ago, but there's just lots to talk about. So we'll never be done.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know I get phone calls and stuff from people about like, hey, I'm getting my hips replaced. Do you have any recommendations? And part of what I always say is like, it's not a linear process, right? The healing is not like you'll be here today and here tomorrow and here the next day. Like it is like all over the place. And it's you just have to keep learning. Like that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So uh, like keep that growth mindset going because you're going to grow a lot in this process.
Yeah. Well, Jill, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, like a ton. It's an honor to talk to you, really.
Oh, it's so fun, Anthony. I feel like I know you from just the years of back and forth and your posts, and I I just have a lot of respect for what you do and for your community, and I'm here to help.
Well, awesome. Well, I'm going to check out that body by breath immersion. I'm going to check
Yeah,
that.
I'll send you a link. I'll
Sweet.
send you a link right now.
Perfect. And then where can other people find more information about you and everything we talked about today?
The website is tuneupfitness.com. That's all one word, like you tune up a car, Tune Up Fitness. And you can find me where, my events, as well as the events and other educators that teach my work all over the world, like people like Tiffany. But we have educators who teach this work all over the planet. And I will be teaching some live events mostly on the East Coast this year. I think I'm going to be in the Berkshires teaching at a yoga festival called the Berkshire Yoga Fest. And then I'm also teaching a very, very high-end retreat center. It's called Canyon Ranch. Very fancy fascia retreat at the Canyon Ranch around that same time in early June. I will be in the UK teaching in late September, and I will be presenting at the Fascia Research Congress in New Orleans in August. So I'm very involved with the fascia research community, and I'm really psyched to present some of my work there in August. And those are the places to find me live. Otherwise, you can find me alive online anytime.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you go. And thank you again. I appreciate it so much.
Be well. Take care.
You too. See ya.